What is gender? Well, it's what people feel they are. It's like, yeah, that's your theory, eh? That's a stupid theory. It's not going anywhere, that theory. And so that's just a theory that enables you to claim something like the primacy of your narcissistic whim. It has nothing to do with the careful delineation of what actually constitutes identity. And so it's complex because there is variability in masculinity and femininity on top of the binary biological substructure. And so that also means that you have to have a certain amount of tolerance for role variability. And you should, because there are masculine women and there are feminine men. And it's harder for them in some real sense to adopt the role that would be easily commensurate with their biological identity because they share many features, temperamental features that are characteristic of the opposite sex. But that doesn't mean that they're born in the wrong body. It's unpopular children who say, oh, well, the game is only going to be the one I want to play. And those children, other children just move away from. They alienate and isolate them instantly, and they go look for other play partners. Those kids are no fun. And it's because they're too insistent that their subjective state dominate the social space. And that's exactly what's happening on the identity politics front. It's like, well, I feel I'm this way, and you better treat me like that or else. It's like, you are a bad little kid. You're a kid that never learned how to play, and you're being fostered in your juvenile delusion by your narcissistic virtue signaling parents who aren't sensible enough to help you guide yourself towards the establishment of an identity that would allow you to be appreciated by other children. Well, what exactly is it that's born in the wrong body? Is it some sort of soul? I mean, people who make these claims are generally not on the side of the people who claim the existence of the soul. So what the hell is it exactly that's born in the wrong body? The person's core identity, the person's true self. It's like, yeah, that's all hand-waving. I have no idea what you mean by that, except unless it's part of a context-dependent story where we more or less agree on the terms. But to abstract them out and say, well, that's not the person's real core self. It's like, sorry, man, you've wandered into uncharted territory there. First of all, you think you know what constitutes people's core self. It's like, really? You really know that, do you? Yeah, well, I don't think so. If you're very confused about your identity, let's say you have gender dysphoria, you are suffering from a number of symptoms that are more generally associated with depression and anxiety in a more low-resolution way, and some specific symptoms that mark out your gender dysphoria. And you might say that it's the gender dysphoria that's predisposing you to whatever self-destructive urges you might have that could manifest themselves in suicide. But the clinical literature indicates quite clearly that it's actually this co-activated association of more generic symptoms of depression and anxiety that elevate whatever suicide risk you have. And so the notion that mere subjective insistence on your feeling identity is going to reduce your proclivity to suicide is absolutely preposterous. There's no evidence whatsoever that that's the case. Gender dysphoria of the type that you described is relatively rare, but if you leave kids alone till they're 19 or 18, 80 to 90% of them settle into their biological identity, although about 80% of them are also homosexual in their orientation. The pathway for him, before this was all politicized, was you'd have a child who was gender non-conforming temperamentally, somewhat like you were. You didn't have a pattern of female interests, and then prone to depression and anxiety, and then that combination would produce this gender dysphoria, and that would become quite intense around the dawn of puberty. But if you just backed the hell off and waited, those kids would settle into their body, but generally adopt a homosexual orientation.